grasp of the challenges, her grasp of the poor communication, her grasp of the failure of the law, her grasp of the existence of law that is not applied, and her willingness to speak plainly to her colleagues in city government very plainly. And it was startling and refreshing and gave me a modicum of hope where it has not always existed before, that I thought she had real courage for someone so young, or really has no future in city government, I'm not sure.
So was there any discussion of the damage to the park itself?
Well, of course that came up, but the fact is that's
Not measured either?
no, they wrote a check last year. They had to replace all the turf. That's part of their profit statement. And as long as they're willing to do it and they have assumed responsibility, they write a check and all goes on. So no one's measuring the trees. There's a lot of unmeasured things that we'd like to see evaluated. I actually think you might find the PPC surprisingly sympathetic, at least the old staff. They have a lot of new staff over there that we don't know well. But that's our measure. That's our motion. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Is there further discussion of it? We're not committing to spend the 7. We'd like to be able to say that the board's willing to commit 7. We're not going to get anything done for $7,000. So if we're not getting matching funds going, we're going to be.
Is this just going to be a resolution of intent then?
No, the board's willing to commit a figure not to exceed $7,000 for these purposes is the motion. And it presumes we will, if somebody wants to donate the balance of it, and they'll do all of what we want for $7,000, so be it. That isn't going to happen. We need to seek other funding, as Jennifer said.
There will need to be another kind of firm, not a traffic firm, to do the sound, right? So you're looking at different places.
We need a number of things at once here, but traffic and parking are a huge part of the impacts, the single biggest. But noise and tree parks, the impact on the parks are also huge.
Who is Midtown Atlanta this year?
Song?
When is Midtown?
Music Midtown.
17 or 19.
It's 17. What got our attention was that they proposed closing 10th Street in pieces a week, 6 working days before the festival starts. And that's really what made us sit up and go nuts.
Yeah.
And it's just frustrating as can be. They really have basically seized the city assets. And I would accept it a lot better personally if the return on the event went into the city coffers, but since it doesn't, I find that even more irksome. Anyway, is there further discussion?
One question, is there a snowball's chance that Music Midtown would help fund or match what we have?
Well, we certainly intend to ask them to be part of the study, and they might. They've actually been somewhat. I don't want to paint them as they're not. They have been surprising in some ways, but certainly we intend to ask them. We absolutely feel they should do this. Period. But in case they don't.
I'm going to ask for some money from Trees Atlanta. I mean, they might.
Anyway, any further discussion? All these are good ideas. Any further discussion? I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of the motion? All right, that is that. Let's move on to safety. I was gonna report from Peggy, but I think Alex summed it up, and I think that's good enough. And whatever comes tomorrow, it's got 9 co-sponsors, as the article that Peggy and John put together indicates, and in any case, I think it's a step in the right direction, and whether it passes, becomes enacted tomorrow, at least the right questions are being asked. Let's move on to grants. Ms. Wyndham.
Yeah, so, sort of like Madigan reported earlier, VHCA gives small grants every year, and Peggy and I have been working together to just sort of condense that into a one-pager process and a one-pager application for people to submit their idea for a small grant and sort of create a process for how the board would approve them. And one concern that came up was just sort of not overcommitting of future boards to a certain amount and making the process flexible enough to where we could give grants to just creative ideas that improve the community, typically in a very public way, so not for private property, that kind of thing. I don't have the documents with me, but the idea was to get them out, either get them done this year for next year's grant cycle, or to, I don't know if we have enough time for this year, but this is something we've been working on to try to get the grant process a little more formal, other than the way that we've been doing it in the past.
Yeah, I think it's designed to kind of broaden the reach a little bit. It doesn't necessarily commit us to putting a lot of money in. Do you want to mention any of the discussion we had about criteria? Because I do if you don't.
Sure. Well, yeah. We can talk about that first.
So I do expect that historically we will continue to apply the criteria that have never been formalized, that grants would not go, would be typically not be for stuff on private property, though that is not necessarily an absolute one, but they will reflect, it will not be made to groups that are not open to all members of the public that are willing and desire to participate in them. There will be no exclusion on the basis of religious convictions, sexual preference, race, nationality, and presumably gender as well, unless, of course, it was a program designed specifically to address a gender-specific issue, such as women's issues or men's issues, for that matter. So I don't know, are those formally in the grant proposals now?
Yeah, so
Right,
there's one
so that's
thing
the
that-
intent. This is not, and the typically about private property was that there could be exceptions to that. There could be artistic exceptions to that conceivably. So we're not trying
I
to,
thought that language was still under discussion.
well, that action may be under discussion. What do you want to do with it? Or discuss
Well,
it?
we don't have the language in front of us, but I mean, both Peggy and I objected to that term. Because there's private property that is open to the public. For example, New Highland Park is private property. So I don't think that there should be language excluding the use on private property. You're excluding use for private enjoyment. So I can't apply to the Civic Association to give me a grant to put in a new garden in my backyard. That is my private enjoyment. So maybe that's a way to phrase it, for private enjoyment, because it's not private property. Private property can be used for the benefit of the community and open to the public.
Does this mean Laura could get a grant for the front yard? Everybody goes by in the spring and summer. You need a little money to
I
fix it.
enjoy it.
But
No, there's more seriousness behind that, because I agree with you. If we're going to make it available to private citizens on private, it needs to be fairly clear-cut exactly what.
No, it's not available for private citizens on private property, but the term private property, as I said, is too broad. Because like I said, I think New Highland Park, North Highland Park is private property.
I kind of like
Civic
the
belongs
line
to
now.
us.
I like just saying that the criteria was for a public good,
Yeah.
so it's general enough to where we could
That's fine.
not even get.
We got a suggestion a few years ago that we should put up a basketball goal in somebody's backyard to address a real point. There's nowhere for kids to hang out and shoot baskets in this damn neighborhood. There isn't. But that, to me, felt like a terrible slippery slope. So,
These are applications.
No
You may get
problem.
100
Good enough.
applications
Good
and
enough.
do
So-
five.
Right.
Right. No, but my point
So-
is,
y'all are gonna write, are we comfortable with this? We're gonna do the public distribution. We will
For the
see.
next grant cycle, for the 2015 grant cycle. There's not enough time for this grant cycle.
You can see what comes in a month if you want to. Some people might be able to put a proposal together in a month. It's entirely possible. I don't see the harm in asking, with the understanding that these things need to be in the middle of August, so that we can make a reasonable review. We do know that we have a lot of traditional support, schools, parks, libraries that we've supported for many years, and that we intend to presumably keep supporting because they're such an integral part of the neighborhood and used by such huge numbers. But I don't know, is there harm in trying for, putting the article out now and saying if we've got something, and is there harm? I'm asking, I don't know.
I think the harm is that it's very late in the process, and the amount of money that's available for grants this year is most likely limited by some of the huge projects we've had this year, like Master Plan and John Howell Park. And the original thought was next year, when we don't have those significant expenditures, of course we'll have others that are different, but the thought is that there will be more grant money available next year, and that we will make an effort to have more money dedicated to grants. And then that is the time to open it up. That's my thought.
What is the board's pleasure? It's hard ever to disagree with you. But
I mean, is the criteria not something that you can still put in place this year? Or saying you want the grant applicants to know the criteria and you feel like they should before they apply, versus just this year anybody could apply without falling into that criteria?
I think that there isn't much money, and it's going to be difficult to award grants beyond the traditional grants of the schools and the library. And you know, if you look at the traditional grants, and probably Church of Our Savior, who has become a host for our monthly meetings, I just think that this year was the regrouping year and the planning year, and we've done that. And the last piece of the grant planning puzzle is to have the funding to roll out a new robust grant program. And it seems like this isn't the year for that.
my only thought about it was, it seems odd to me to publish this criteria and plea for grants and then say it's a year off.
No, we're not going to publish it.
Yeah, I wouldn't publish it now. I would say when we do
All right.
grants this fall, we could say, hey, we
All right.
love you, library, here's another grant, and next year there's our criteria.
Our applicants year to year never know how much money we have to do
Well,
that.
that's a fact, and it's gone up and down, as you know from your time on the
And it's
board.
always dependent upon the success of Summerfest. And Tour of Homes is beginning to be a major contributor. I don't think there's I think we should never have the expectation it's going to be larger and better next year. We just never know. And as this is now, as I said, applicants don't know the amount of money we're giving them.
Well, we do. We
Yeah,
know,
you
but for we know the amount for 2014 grants. That was determined. I don't have it with me, but when we developed the budget last year, after the Summerfest numbers came in, after Tour of Homes came in, we developed the budget. We said, okay, after we pay for the master plan, after we pay for John Howell Park, after we pay for all the different things, here's how much money's left over. So by January, December, January, we will know how much we have for grants. And we will have that number in place, and then we can roll out this new and improved grant program next year. That, I just
We
think,
agree.
yeah.
We're just saying, it's just,
Yeah.
you may not have a bigger pot next year.
Right,
even
but
though
we'll
you come
know
up
in
with it.
January. Whereas it just seems rushed now, here we are, you know, middle of July.
I think it might stress out people who we've given grants in the past too. Like, I wouldn't want Madigan to feel like, you know, we're gonna make you work for it this year. Because she does such great work with what she has.
Do we need a motion, or do we just need to agree now that we're going to finalize the language of the process and write an article? Maybe even when we write an article about the grants that we did give, say, and we have implemented this new process, and here's the criteria for next year.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go back to planning. We left an item off.
We have one item, which is to add George, what's your last name? Van Horn, sorry, to the planning committee. He's come to a few meetings and expressed an interest. Do you mind telling people your background?
My name is George Van Horn. I live on Monroe Drive. I've lived in the neighborhood for 28 years. and I'm a forensic mechanical engineer. I'm a registered professional engineer, and I belong to the International Code Council, people that write the building codes, and the National Fire Protection Association. And I want to get more involved in the neighborhood. This kind of stuff I find interesting and strangely calming.
Oh, we need you.
Yeah. So I went to two planning committee meetings, and the committee looked deep in my soul and said, "You've been here twice. You want to come back?" So I liked it.
You'll be on the board very soon.
Oh,
That's the way it happens.
Yes, I will say that that was then a motion to add George Van Horn to the planning committee.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor? Sir, welcome. Thank you for showing up. Thank you very much. There's no idea. You have no idea what you've got.
I've lured a lot of people in myself and in other volunteer organizations, so I know.
I think we'll go on to the Parks Committee, and David has done a lot of this recently, and I'll comment, you can fill in some.
No, I want you to do it.
I thought you did. So, to our, as you know, the Parks project that we started on 2 years ago, we got a grant, and then it went through our own version of permitting hell. It's really quite astonishing, is all I can say. Good thing we hired a professional expediter. It would have been so quick. And it's not even a joke about the expediter. It was not quick. It took forever. But the permits are in place, and we knew it would start sometime in late July or August, and then, of course, to our astonished amazement, the contractor arrived early and began work, fully permitted. They are going to fix the tree fence. We're meeting with them on the site on Tuesday. They're going to put it a little bigger. They can't put it all the way down, I'll tell you why, because there's steps going on. So they've begun work, and with any luck, the first stage of this, after the removal of the old stuff, which has been substantively done, a lot of the old galvanized is gone, we'll be building the new walls. This will feature new granite retaining walls that will keep the dang sand on the field and out of the storm drains and off the streets. So it's really looking forward to it. They aspire to have the walls done before school starts on August 4th, and they might make it, which would be terrific. And then after that, there's some other things that have to be done. There'll be a plaza built at the corner that the kids can hang out with, some sitting walls. The sign has to be reconstructed and put back up. And then this fall, there'll be some planting to do to try to do it. There'll be some changes made to the volleyball court that the volleyballers may be funding themselves, some underground drainage they're interested in. But we'll wind up with a much better delineated play area with low walls between the playground and the volleyball, which will still allow kids to access the world's largest sandbox when it's not being used for volleyball, but we'll make it easier what the boundaries are and to keep the two physically defined and separate. So we are really, really pleased to get it underway. I think it's going to look, the sandbags are gone, never to return. And so we're underway, and we'll keep you updated. So,
Good question. Are the plans online anywhere? Or could I post them?
Plans are in the box, you just need to go over there. Going over there.
We'll get you, I'll get Peter to send you an updated version of the plan so we can get them up. Yes, Wayne?
Everybody else in the neighborhood's looking
What
at it,
is
might as well too.
the completion date for this?
We don't have a perfect completion date, but they anticipate by the end of September that, we'll get the construction done, we hope by mid-August or late August, and then there's some planting that will probably come after whether the weather cools off and the dormant season is upon us. But we aspire to get this fixed. There's a couple of tiny challenges, but all the big hoops have been jumped through, and we hope, we pray. So this will look so much better, and it's unbelievable, really. asked us,
We put 50,000
Do they do any kind of like ribbon cutting or?
there will be a ceremonial ribbon cutting.
We've actually kind of missed the point, is so when we should have had this completed, but yes, I think there will.
Oh, they're fine.
They're not bad.
How much is the new plaque with all the people on, names of the people on the planning committee gonna cost?
It's just me and Lauren, so it's not gonna be that big.
We've already picked other spots.
You are taking down the old ones, right, the folks we,
There's no budget for plaques whatsoever. This will do an online plaque.
Auction it.
Will be on it.
If any plaque is required.
That's
Making a joke about the extensive,
Flick your way through.
we have severe plaquage from the earlier project.
your name and looks, you got your name on the plaque.
That's all right. There will be no plaques. Is that it for plaques?
Do we rename the park?
Well, let's rename this park. New Island Park, not John Island Park.
Well, the old Highland Park.
So, would you like to make a motion?
I move to officially rename New Highland Park to North Highland Park.
Second.
Is there further discussion? All in favor, please raise your hand.
I did want to add something on parks. We have a snapping turtle nest at Orem Park. Don't forget to start looking for the snapping turtles to hatch out and make their way down to the creek. If you walk along there, which I know you're there a lot, we have to open up the fencing so they can get through late July or early August.
It's actually not, yeah, it's a few more weeks. We actually can just go cut the bottom of the fencing. They can crawl
Okay.
out.
They'll figure it out.
I walk by there every day. If I should see something, and my dogs will alert me if I'm supposed to, who should we announce it to?
Parks@bayhigh.org.
Yeah.
Not just parks@bayhigh.org.
Make sure the dogs are.
Keep the dogs on
No,
leash.
they're not water dogs.
But we can cut too, so like Jack said, so that they have a clear path already and nothing can squeeze in underneath there.
What else? Is there any new business or announcements, please? Can you tell us, we have both a sad announcement and a glad announcement, so I want to, you say a few words about the Legion.
Yeah, I'd just like to make the announcement about the EPA hearing that's going to be on July 29th. You know that Obama and the EPA proposed some regulations on the amount of coal pollution that we would allow. Yeah, there we go. And so we have a lot of coal pollution in Georgia and in the southeast because we run a lot of coal. So the first EPA hearing is going to be on July 29th, and it's going to be downtown in the Richard Russell Building. And they're going to take hearings, they're going to take public comment for 2 days. So if you want to make a public comment, you can go to the website and sign up and go speak. I think it's a 5-minute limit. And along with that, there's lots of environmental organizations forming a coalition, and they're going to have a rally on the 29th at 12, and speakers, and then they're going to walk to the government building because they feel that that the EPA really needs to hear from people saying to step up the renewable energy and cut down on coal. So it's pretty exciting because this is the first EPA hearing, and the whole nation probably is going to be looking at what goes on here. We unfortunately have the highest coal polluting plant in the country, which is Plant Shear outside of Macon, and we also have the third highest coal plant, coal polluter, and that's the one that's up at Cartersville. So even though the Southern Company, which is the corporation that oversees Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi power plants, have begun to close coal plants in anticipation of, already they've closed 4 in Georgia, so they're anticipating what's going on. And also, the other factor is that solar energy is the cheapest energy by far right now. So those are all real positive things because of the medical aspects of cold pollution, which is primarily asthma, and increased mercury, that kind of thing. So if you can make it, that'd be great. You know, go on the website and find out some more about it. I think it's pretty exciting. So the other thing I want to talk about is those of you who knew Billy Joe, she passed away last Monday, and she was a real fixture in this community for many, many, many years. Came to the meetings, John says he never knew her, but then when we described her, he remembered her. You know, she was an older lady with white hair. And she was just real active in everything. She was just a wonderful, active person. Really good friend of Libby's and many of ours. And she had this incredible cactus collection. So Winnie and I decided that we would bring some of them and give everybody a cactus.
You can live on.
And so everybody has to take a cactus. It's more. Now these are very wet, so what I would do is
Yeah, how do you keep them alive?
don't water them.
Oh, I can't live that.
Put them in the sun and don't water them and, you know, whatever. So you can kind of reach in here and take what color you want. And these are really wet, so really don't water them. Really don't water them.
I hope everybody in the audience will help
Yeah, and
themselves
there's
as
maybe
well.
some extra ones here, so. And if you,
So we're working on an obituary for her, and there will be some form of memorial service this fall, and we'll see what we can do. She was recognized by the Citizens Association in, I think, 2005 or 6, and I can't, poor record, so it's really reflective. Neither Winnie or I can remember the exact nature of the award, but she was
That
recognized.
was for the public safety.
Okay.
She was the first person who did by hand in all lowercase letters and decorated.
Which is the way she signed her name, too.
The police report that she, went to the Kirkwood area, pulled the police report monthly and started doing all those statistics that John Wolfinger now does. And then she would bring them to the
So the police department probably really very much appreciated that.
They loved Billy Joe. After we chewed them out for trying to run her off. So it was kind of a funny story. Yeah, we weren't too receptive to that. And, she was bugging them a little bit. And so she came back and told everybody, that they had told her she couldn't have the crime stats. And we were like, what? And so after that, they treated her like the princess of Virginia-Highland.
she also got the traffic light by the library.
Yeah. She also ran off drug dealers on Greenwood. When she first came to the neighborhood, which was in the early 90s, there were some drug dealers still on Greenwood Avenue, and she stood right up to them, and they didn't leave because she had the police going over there all the time, checking on them.
Well, she was really a completely classic Virginia-Highlander. They don't make them like that anymore. So we will miss her. Thanks for these. These are great gifts and great ways to remember her. So thank you very much. Is there anything else that the board need new business again for the board? We are adjourned.
Wait, calendar.
I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am. I apologize.
Just that we have the annual meeting scheduled for 9/18 at school as usual. I think that we have Jenny's gotten the school cafeteria.
I'm still waiting to hear from them. I dropped it off in June, so they had ample time, but you know how they are. I keep pestering them so I can get the final.
And I think they're back as of July 1st, or whatever, to documents in and all, that kind of usually helps you can talk to Teresa. But anyway, so that's scheduled, and then we're still going to have the regular meeting on 9/8/14 just to handle variances and other business. So those are all the calendar items that I know of.
The meeting is adjourned at 8:31. Thank you all very much.
No.
Can I go with you? He's got a campaign.
Yeah.